Hello and good evening. I'm Yaron Ayalon, Director of the Yaschik Arnold Jewish Studies Program and Associate Professor of Jewish and Middle Eastern Studies at the College of Charleston. I'd like to welcome you to another Jewish Studies event, the first of three conversations that I'll have the fortune to have with Dr. Nachman Shai about the fall of liberal Zionism. These three events are sponsored by the Norman and Jerry Sue Arnold Center for Israel Studies here at the college, as well as the Center for Israel Education in Atlanta. Our other two conversations with Dr. Shai will take place on March 2nd and then on March 23rd. Well, that's election day, so I guess we'll see what happens. Before we get to tonight's event, let me just remind you all that today's talk is part of a long series of events that our program is hosting this semester, all virtual and all free. For example, this Thursday at 7 p.m., we will host a conversation with the CNN analyst, attorney, and politician, Bakari Sellers. And next Tuesday, the 16th, at 7 p.m., we will be discussing the challenges that Israeli Ethiopians have had to face. And that will be with Professor Don Seaman of Emory University. And there's a much longer list of these. And all the information with links to register via Zoom are found on our website at jewish.cfc.edu/events. That link will be in the chat soon, as well as on our Facebook page. And that link also will be in the chat soon. Before I introduce our speaker, just a reminder that we will be discussing the matter at hand for the first 30 minutes or so tonight, and then open it up to questions. You may send those questions to me or Kim. Kim Browdy is our Associate Director for Community Relations, and she should be at the top of your screen if you're looking at all the windows. You can send the questions to me or to Kim via the chat, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Okay, so now for tonight's speaker. It is my utmost privilege to once again moderate the conversation with Dr. Nachman Shai, former Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, where he served for the last 10 years. Prior to his election to the Knesset, he held diverse positions in the media and the military, including Director General of the Second Television and Radio Authority, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Channel 2 News Company, and Chairman of the Israel Broadcasting Authority, and a spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces. Of course, I'm omitting the list is just too long to mention tonight. But I should say spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces during the First Gulf War, a role in which perhaps most Israelis, at least of my age, still identify him with. For many of us growing up during that war, Shai was this calming voice amidst all the chaos. He was someone we all admired and looked up to. And so I honestly still cannot believe that I have this type of a job where I get to have a conversation with him. So that's just great. Dr. Shai, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ron and Yaron, and I'm glad to have you all on Zoom. I mean, this is a new way of life for all of us. No meetings, no personal touch, but I'm glad to be part of this series. This was Yaron's idea, and it's my pleasure as politics is very much in my blood, and I'm ready to share it with you as much as I can. So thank you very much again for Yaron for this opportunity.
Thank you. That's great. I have to say, when we started talking about this idea of doing this series of three conversations, I asked you in our preliminary conversation to start with the issue of psychology, which is what we'll be talking about today. And because I always felt that there's an issue here when we try to understand why the Israeli left or liberal Zionism, it's not always synonymous. These are not always the same thing. But why has the Israeli left really seen such a major decline in the last 20, 25, 30 years? I'm sure you have your interpretation on when it began. But I thought that psychology is something very powerful. And so I want to start just with 48 seconds of something that Donald Trump said. He said it before he got elected in 2016. There's a line from that, from the 48 seconds that is very well known to almost everyone here, I'm sure. The famous line of being able to shoot someone in Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. But I want you to watch these 48 seconds because these 48 seconds perhaps without particular intention, Donald Trump defined something very clearly in those 48 seconds. And I'll try to say what it is, but let's watch this first.
The people, my people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible. No, they say, Trump, we love you too, man. Trump's voters are by far, you know, I'm at 68, 69%. I'm at 90% total. Like, will you stay? Absolutely. I think it's 68 or 69%. Will you most likely stay? That gets into the 90s. Other guys are like at 10. A guy like Jeb Bush, he has a nobody, but he's like I mean, like they don't have people. They have nothing. Rubio, soft. They're all soft. All soft.
So I wonder if inadvertently Trump defined here what a personality cult is, meaning a group of people who are always going to be loyal to him no matter what he does. And if that is something that we might use to explain the situation in Israel. And I guess that leads me to what would be my first question, which is, if we look at, and there are many parallels that it has been written about numerous times between Trump and Netanyahu. Some parallels are probably more pronounced than others. What is this emotional connection that Likud voters in Israel have with their party and its leaders that perhaps labor or center-left voters do not? And why is there such a difference? Is it just that people on the left are not into personality cults, or is it not a personality cult? Maybe I'm wrong and there's a different explanation.
Who's supposed to answer the question?
You.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you asked a general question to the entire audience. That's why I was wondering what the answer was. My pleasure. I'm ready. I'm prepared for the question. Pleasure. Okay. Thank you very much again. I would say that there is, of course, some similarities between Trump and Netanyahu. The last, but not the least, is both of them face trial this week. Netanyahu visited the Jerusalem court yesterday. It was a short visit, but finally and formally his trial started. It will take a long time, but this is the beginning. And his good friend, President Trump, his trial started here at the Congress. The difference between the two of them, that we know that what will be the outcome of President Trump's trial. He will be probably acquitted. I mean, there's a majority there. I mean, not a majority, but not votes enough against him. But in the case of Netanyahu, it's not the parliament, it's not the Knesset. The court is the regional court in Jerusalem.
An actual court, yes.
Yeah, and that is something that no one can predict what the outcome will be. Back to now, so that's the last. But there are many similarities between these two leaders. But I would like to refer to the voters, to their electorate. Yes, you're right. There's something similar in terms of their motivation, or the power that drives them to support both Netanyahu and Trump. It's very much emotional. At least I'm an expert more than on Israel than here in the United States, so I can attest to the Israeli case study. Likud supporters are usually very emotional, and it's not now. It's an historical attachment to their party, to their leaders. It was the case with Menachem Begin, the late Menachem Begin, Israel's Prime Minister from 1977 and on, when people were following him for almost 30 years. He was the head of the opposition for 30 years, head of the opposition in Israel, and people were following him in rainy days or in hot weather, anytime, anywhere he went, and we were waiting for him to win. I don't remember of many world leaders that were able to keep their constituency so close to them without being able to serve them anyway, because you can hardly do anything while you are in the opposition. And I can tell you from my own experience, I served for 10 years as a Knesset member on the opposition bench. It's nice, but there's not much power there. But Likud, at the time, it was Cherut, those who came actually from the underground before 1948, before the state was established, okay? The two underground organizations from center-right, Etzel and Lehi. Cherut was the political body which carried their own ideology, and they were not deterred after 30 years in power. The very fact is that that community, which was relatively small at the time, grew along the years. Yet in 1977, they haven't reached to the top of their political power because there was a certain concrete reason in 77, if you want me to be more specific, which broke the traditional governing party, Mapai, or later on Ha'avodah, the labor, into two pieces. One of 34 mandates and the other for 17. So 17 mandates moved from left to right, and they finally broke the eternity government of labor and associate parties that has been there for many years, even before 1948. So, but it took, and even since then, labor went down and down. We will discuss it in this meeting and the upcoming ones, while Likud grew, became more powerful, and with all the happenings on even the recent ones, including the trial from yesterday, which has been a long time on our agenda, on Israel's agenda, Likud is still the leading party with at least 30 Knesset. This is the last poll, which is not published by Israeli media, 30 Knesset seats. It's the largest party in the country. I would believe it's very much a kind of emotional attachment to the leaders. Likud had for the entire history 4 leaders only for the entire party history, while Labor, for example, has been replacing chairmen and chairwomen like socks. Okay, every second year, a new chairman or a new chairwoman. So there was no consistency. While in the Likud, Netanyahu has been able to maintain power now for over 12 years. He's the longest period in power, longer than David Ben-Gurion.
As Prime Minister, but as chairman of the Likud since 2006, this time.
I mean,
if I'm not mistaken.
Netanyahu, so even longer.
Yes.
They are not running to change leadership. And even if the leader is not only to be indicted, but in other circumstances, and also as a natural process of changing power, which applies to every party, everywhere in the world. It does not apply to Likud. As long as Netanyahu will stays in power, they will respect him and let him continue. I speak about his general electorate, and specifically about his Knesset members and his government members. They do not. I mean, in case they try to, he has his own way how to get rid of them. But there's something stable in the Likud, while Labor, which is supposed to be the second largest party at the time, the largest one in the country, is losing power. Now in the last poll, it's a miracle that Labor has 7. So it's really not even a chance to replace Netanyahu. So again, trying to get into the roots of this kind of loyalty, I would say it's very much based on their trust and belief in their leader, the one that they can follow, and even with the media, the negative media which he usually gets, and other, even Israel's failure to run this pandemic crisis, Israel in general failed. I mean, we vaccinated most of the not most, even half of the people in Israel, but in terms of conducting and managing the crisis, not better than in the United States. Okay, I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm not complimenting you now for your conduct of the Israel is doing worse. Okay, that doesn't change the basic attitude within the Likud and within the general public in Israel. He's still the leading, and he is probably, as far as I can see today, Israel's next prime minister. That's my own assumption. I mean, don't catch me on that. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it seems like he's heading towards another term. It depends how he will build his coalition, which is a different matter. Again, all the time, we have been asking, I've been a member of Knesset for 10 years, most of the time in the labor, we've been asking ourselves, last election we had significant political power, was in 2015, we had 24 Knesset members, we always made it. And then something happened during the election day, it shows a little bit of Netanyahu's political qualifications and talents. He's a master of politics. I should give him the credit for that. On election day, there's no absentee votes in Israel. You should come to the polls. So at 6 o'clock in the evening, he was losing. It was quite clear. His supporters, many of them did not come to the polls. So he came out on the social media. He cannot use the traditional media on election day. They don't give access to any active politicians on election day. He delivered a message to his supporters. The Arabs are coming to vote in masses, which means the Arabs are going to determine who will be Israel's next prime minister. In 2 hours, the ballots were full of voters that did not intend to vote this day. 300,000. Well, proportionally in Israel, I mean, it's a lot. It's not in the 300,000 in the States, it's much less. Okay, well, when it comes to the presidential election, it's also significant. But 300,000 people that were already at home, having dinner, or washing their kids, or doing other stuff, they left everything because they were concerned that the Arabs, it was a kind of incitement, honestly. But this is the game, this is politics. And in 2 hours, he changed the course of the elections. The outcome was that he won the election by 30 Knesset mandates, and my party, the Zionist camp, had 24, and it was sufficient for him to bring and to build a new coalition. So there's something.
This was in 2015.
Pardon me?
I'm saying, for those who don't know, this was in 2015.
15, yes, 2015. This was the last and the only challenge to Netanyahu's government. I mean, in the last election, there were 35.
Blue and white, right.
Yeah, in blue and white, but this is a different matter. That's not a party. This is something else. I hope we can talk about it.
We'll get to talk about that.
Yes, what's blue and white. But again, for the Likud, that's what I'm saying. Their support to their party is indefinite. They will come. I mean, even if they don't want to, or they oppose their government, something in their heart, emotionally, as I said before, will force them to leave everything. I mean, we are going to lose power. We are going to lose the government. Okay, let's come and vote. And in 2-3 hours, he changed the course of the voting, and he won the election. So I would give him the credit of, having this idea, which I actually didn't like very much, especially by threatening the Jews that the Arabs are coming to vote. That's quite an issue. We can talk about that separately. But the bottom line is, we have to win the elections, and those people, hundreds of thousands, came immediately when he called them and voted for him and made him again the Prime Minister of Israel.
Thank you. You mentioned something that I was planning to show later, but you mentioned it now, so I'll show it now. Those 20 seconds of what you just referred to, because I think it's really telling. And many here, I don't think, have seen that video message. And I have it here with subtitles, so I'll show it in a second. How in essentially 20 seconds of a short video posted on social media, as you said, the entire outcome of the election was changed. And the question is, I want to drill a little deeper into this issue of the connection of the voters with the party. Because we know, first of all, that if the Likud gets 30 seats, not all the 30 seats come from people who have this emotional connection. Maybe half of them do. I don't know. It's hard for me to assess. But just like we know that out of the 70 million people who voted for Trump in this election, not all of them are Trumpists who supported what happened on January 6th, right? There are many of them, they had other reasons. Maybe they always vote for Republicans, so they voted for him now, and maybe there are other reasons. I don't know. So I think we know there are lots of people who, in Israel, for various reasons, I'm not an expert on this as you are. What I have heard many times is people who, to me, did not seem to have this emotional connection, but rather said, well, there's really no alternative. I'm waiting to see an alternative. But since there isn't one, I choose stability. And stability is I choose the bad that I already know. The bad that I already know is Netanyahu. I know of all his flaws. I know how bad he's going to be, that he's corrupt and all of that stuff. But I choose him because that's I know what I'm getting. And with blue and white and with others, I don't really know what I'm getting. And of course, that might be the success of Netanyahu, of managing to sort of to crush gradually the opposition in a way that would not that there wouldn't be a serious challenge to him. Let's just this time I won't get the share screen wrong, so we'll be fine. Let's just watch those 20 seconds or so. Of that message that you just referred to, that Netanyahu posted on social media about, what did you say, 3-4 hours before the polls closed? Something like that.
Yeah.
שלטון הימין בסכנה. המצביעים הערבים מגיעים בכמויות אדירות לקלפי. עמותות השמאל מביאות אותם באוטובוסים. רבותיי, לנו אין V15. לנו יש צו 8, לנו יש רק אתכם. צאו לקלפי, תביאו את החברים, את בני המשפחה, הצביעו מחל, נסגור את הפער בינינו לבין מפלגת העבודה, ובעזרתכם, בעזרת השם, נקים ממשלה לאומית שתשמור על מדינת ישראל.
That's it. And this, when I look at this, I say there must be a deeper connection there that goes beyond Netanyahu. If you can change, if you have the power to change the entire outcome of an election 3 hours before polls closed with a 20-second video message, forget what the message is. Some people said it was racist or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. If you have such a power, then that means that there are people, not everyone who votes for you, but apparently those who went out and voted, who are, this connection runs very deep. So I guess my question to you is, let's try to drill a little deeper into this. When does this connection begin? It doesn't begin with Netanyahu, right? Does it begin in the pre-state days when Begin was still in the Irgun with the small group of those revisionists, or Cherut, the Freedom Party that preceded Likud? Where does it begin, this kind of connection?
Well, first of all, these are two major ideologies. One of Likud and Labor are two conflicting and contrasting ideologies. On the one hand, that's a social democratic one. On the other is national and liberal one. They propose and suggest two different ways to conduct the state. Totally different ones. One based on organized state with much more involvement and in running the states, and the other leaves a lot or almost everything to the free market. Let the market set the course of the state in a way. So that was from the very beginning, even before the pre-state days. But after and Labor was there. I would say everyone knows that nothing can change this history Labor was there to build the country for around 100 years, let's say, in general, with 5 aliyot, and then the most important years after the Second World War, the years leading to the inception of the State of Israel. Labor was in power, and he actually laid the ground for the State of Israel. That's why it was really relatively smooth that those institutes which were built before 1948 suddenly turned to be state institutions. Foreign ministry, the IDF, government ministries, health system, everything was already prepared for that day. Likud was not part of the game. And the Cherut was not dealing with building the states. They have their own struggle, courageous and problematic, I would say, against the British. They contributed as much as they can to push out the British out of the country. But when it comes to the basic idea of building Israel and preparing the Yishuv, the 600,000 people living in Eretz Israel at the time for a future state, it was mainly labor, not Likud, not Cherut, not Zionim Klalim, none of the other. They were living in the country, but they didn't have the vision like Ben Gurion that everything we are doing now is actually building or laying the ground, as I said, or the stable ground for a future state. That worked very well, as you all know. For almost 40 years, labor remained in power. But during this period, something else happened, and labor did not pay attention or ignore it, or just I wasn't aware of it. Hundreds of thousands of olim, of newcomers, came to Israel, or were invited to come to Israel, or were brought to Israel from many states, mainly from the former Arab states and mainly from North Africa. At a very few decades, they were not really involved in the entire state operation, I would say. They were still building their life. But they were watching jealously the other people's life, those who were there for many years, that were much more better off, that were even affluent, that had better education. A deep feeling of discrimination started to grow slowly. It started with the grandparents, went on to the parents, and then to their children. Even if it was not true, or only partially true, this is what dominated their political affiliation. That the state, i.e. Israel, did not give them at the beginning, even conditions like the others. No equality. You are socially so-called, you treat everyone the same, don't sell us the bullshit. You are the elite, and we are the newcomers. We have to work much harder. We don't have the same start in our life like you did, and so-called you will be always in power, and we will be working for you or with you, but will never be the power itself. The Cherut and Menachem Begin himself, which was, as I said before, a very veteran politician, he's been only in politics for 30 years, he managed to read those signs, this basic discrimination, and he diverted their frustration to support Likud. And then the demography spoke. Demography, as it is now with the ultra-Orthodox. Their families, the newcomers, mainly from Sephardic origin, were much larger than the Ashkenaz families. In the Ashkenaz families, now the Ashkenaz family, I think, is even bigger than they were at the time. An average size of a Jewish family now in Israel is 3.1 the family, which is a world record. At the time, even smaller. because like two kids were enough. This is the days after the Second World War, Holocaust, and the conditions were not easy for anyone. But in the Sephardic families, in those who came from Arab states or North Africa, the numbers were much bigger. So on the one hand, it added to the initial difficulties of them to give, I would say, a comfortable life to the second, third generation, because it has to be divided between so many kids. But for the long run, it built a certain big electorate that was, as I said, frustrated, that carried this discrimination, that was looking sometimes for a kind of revenge against the Ashkenaz, and they were supporting Likud in order to express their political view. And Begin was the master of bringing them together and building this political entity to, on one day in 1977, also as a result of a political combination, to lead for the first time Israel's government. And since it happened, by the way, for the past 40 years, okay, even more than since 1977, it's like 43, 44, during most of this period, it was only Likud premiers, with two exceptions: Rabin for a short time, and Ehud Barak for a short time, and Sharon for a short time, and then Ehud Olmert for a short time. But it's all together, I would say, 8 years. So most of those
Sharon
years,
and Olmert are Likud, essentially. That they rebranded themselves
under new flag called Kadima, which was a mixed party, Likud and Labor, something which was created artificially and politically died after a short time. It led Israel for a while, but that's all. It did not exist much longer. And I myself was a member of this party, so I can tell you a lot of stories about it. It didn't work. But otherwise, for 40 years, and this generation of Israeli-born, originally from Sephardic families, are now the basis, or they give the Likud those 30 mandates, most of them, and they don't change their loyalty, whatever happens. They feel that finally Likud gave them a kind of reach to the states, to the state organizations, to the state institutes, to the Knesset, to serve as mayors of cities, of regional councils. Finally, Likud opened the way for, and they were all born in Israel, like my children. Again, there's no reason for any so-called discrimination any longer. They go to the same school. They got the same education. They have the same opportunities, as far as I can judge. But this feeling never ended. Even these days, they will tell you that their culture is discriminated in comparison with the Ashkenaz culture, that their education is not given, that they don't have the same opportunities in life or to succeed in life like the others. This is something that I personally blame very much the Likud for. I mean, they did not resolve, they didn't want to resolve this discrimination because that served him so much so far. I truly believe this is a sin. This is something that should disappear. But for the time being, it serves the Likud very much, and it helps them to continue their government endlessly. And I don't know what will happen after Netanyahu, if there's after Netanyahu one day, but it seems like Likud actually gathered so much power that it should be sufficient even in the days after Netanyahu, at least for a while. Then we'll see, maybe new leaders will come up.
So I think this is a very good analysis, but I still want to press you a little harder on this question. And we are getting some questions in the chat, and please, all of you, feel free to send in more questions. I'll just say that I will give preference to questions that relate to specifically the topic that we're discussing tonight. We did receive a few questions that are more broader on Israeli politics, and if we can get to them, fine, and if not, we'll save them for next time. But I want to push you on a little further on this issue. So first of all, Begin and that Likud leadership, if you look at who they are, and still to this, well, a little less to this day, but for many, many years, they were not, ethnically speaking, like those people that they claim to represent. They were members of the same intellectual Ashkenazi elite. Begin was, and most of the leadership of the Likud, Yitzhak Shamir was, Netanyahu definitely is. He's not discriminated. And in fact, in some instances, we've seen what he really thinks about those people who vote for him. He's not a big fan of them. He still needs their votes. So to me, the question is there something more here than just loyalty to the party or these days to the man? Because is it, for instance, we have a case, this I'm not going to show as a video, but I can tell all of you the famous case of Orna Peretz, the woman who challenged Netanyahu and called him out on public television, and he humiliated her. It's so much that she came out and said, I've been voting for Likud for all these years, and I'm never, ever voting for them again. And sure enough, within, I don't know, a couple months, she is once again the biggest supporter ever of Bibi and the Likud and all that. And this is just one case. We've seen many such cases. So I wonder if beyond this, meaning this is a psychological connection that transcends even, he can offend his own voters and they will still vote for him. This has been shown. But I wonder if it goes beyond this, and a question we received asked the same thing. If the psychological connection is also about racist issues, that is, if what unites many of these groups is also what we saw in this video, if not hatred, then at least serious fear of the Arabs gaining any power. Because I'm asking this, I have many discussions with Likud supporters, and one of the things that, and supporters of other parties too, and one of the things that many of them told me when it was almost, when blue and white almost got rid of Netanyahu last year, the big fear that they had was what's going to happen. The Arabs are going to be in the government. It's going to be so dangerous. And I kept asking them the one question. I didn't tell them if I thought it was true or not. I just said, why are you so afraid? If you let go of your fear, maybe you just won't be so afraid. Where is the fear? And this is what I'm trying to understand. If there's a connection here between the psychology and that deep fear, if not animosity and actual racism, at least deep fear of the Arabs and what they represent. Because if you take advantage of that, politically speaking in Israel, without the Arabs, you cannot replace Netanyahu. So maybe that's the best strategy, to tie the psychology and the issue of the Arabs together. But that's my question.
A very good question. But I think that what happened in Israel in the past 3-4 months will challenge your thesis. And I tell you,
okay.
I tell my audience what happened. Netanyahu, if you play this 26 seconds again, you will see there's no love lost between Netanyahu and the Arabs, right? He's calling his supporters to come and vote for Likud because maybe the Arabs will topple him. Okay. In the last 4 months, Netanyahu was looking around and he realized something he hasn't even imagined. 2 million Arabs live in Israel. 2 million. 20% of the Israelis are Arabs. 1 out of 5 are Israelis. So he asked himself, why wouldn't they vote for Likud? Do you follow me? He said, this is the Prime Minister that 5 years ago, based on this statement issued at the last moment against the Arab racial statement, that paved his way again to the prime ministership. But 3 months ago, he looked around, there are no more reservoirs that they haven't touched. The former Ethiopians, the ultra-Orthodox, the extreme right, the Kahana movement, he went everywhere. This is it. No more oil, nothing in the land any longer. But he said, what's going on here? 2 million Arabs. If I can draw 2 or 3 mandates from the Arabs, I'm back in power again. And he totally changed his tone towards the Arabs. in 3 months. He finally positioned for the first time in Israel history a Muslim, an Arab in the Likud list, the one that was presented to the Central Knesset election committee last week, the first time. And no one in his party said a word. And no one in the Likud, the huge electorate, raised his voice. Nothing, as if it was natural. What do you mean natural? I was there in Knesset, endless meetings when they brought the Jewish nationality bill, right? What's the name, Ron? The Jewish Nation Bill, which was very much against the Arabs, okay? Very much, and Druze as well, unfortunately. So this is the prime minister that only 2 years ago passed a legislation totally against the Arabs. Okay, there's some consideration for this again, but this is it. This is the interpretation, the common interpretation. And now he's looking for the Arabs to support his government. I mean, even there's no end for cynicism here, but at the same time, between us, it's a political wisdom. It's a political wisdom. He said to himself, if I can draw, why wouldn't you support Likud? And he started moving between the Arab villages, something he hasn't done for years. He went to vaccination station at one of the Arab villages, and he was watching how they were vaccinated, and he carried a political statement. And he said, I'm seeing a lot of Arabs around me, and I'm very happy about that. He discovered the Arabs. How many of them will finally vote for him? I don't know. But let me tell you something. As an Israeli, I liked very much what he did, because he finally brought down the barriers between Jews and Arabs in Israel. And now it is legitimate. Thank you, Netanyahu. But it's legitimate for the left as well as for the right to include Arabs, Israeli Arabs, in their coalition. Because if Likud endorses them, if Netanyahu is ready either to include them in his coalition or at least to be supported by Arabs, Knesset members, why not us? I think he did something very significant for the future of Israel by putting down the barriers which are still dividing between Jews and Arabs. But he didn't do it for that purpose. What he meant was just to, and I don't know if it will succeed, if it succeeds or not. I have no idea, but we'll see. 1 or 2 mandates from the Arabs he can draw, because people tend to sometimes to vote for the government. It pays off. There may be ways to compensate them. That's legitimate. That's part of the political game. So some of them may say, okay, we disagree with the Likud on this, on that, but at least they can deliver. The left or the central left hasn't done it for so many years. So let's talk to. We disagree with the Likud on many issues, but when it comes to education, social welfare, equal opportunities, improving infrastructures in our villages, why not? If the Likud is ready to offer his good services, why not? We'll take it. But again, back to what you said before, finally, I think that it is legitimate for Israeli Arabs to vote for Likud, and it's legitimate from the Likud perspective to get their votes,
to include Arabs,
and to include others and to welcome them. That's something which will work for the benefit of Israel in general.
So that's the Likud side. But now if we go back to the other side, so we know we've established tonight why, more or less, in the time that we had, why the Likud managed to create these kind of connections. So now let's flip this. And we got a few questions about this, actually, so that's good. Why hasn't the other side managed to do the same thing? Those kind of connections. Is it because we still have so many people whose parents and grandparents were humiliated or discriminated by Mapai, the ancestral party of labor? or they just, and we hear this a lot from Likud supporters, right? That they're still angry at Mapai. Mapai hasn't been around for 50 years, but they're still angry at them. And so is it just because of that just too many people are angry at this camp and you can't create it? Or is it, many Likud supporters oftentimes say such and such action, whatever action they're referring to, is not in the Likud's DNA. We don't do this. We don't remove Netanyahu. It's not in our DNA. We're not like Labor that replaces a leader every other year, as you said. So is it the question that, like, really, if we can even speak about this, that the DNA of Labor or the left is just different? Why has the left not been able to create this kind of loyalty that you can't break?
I don't know.
This is the golden question.
This is. I mean, we've been breaking our heads. I will elaborate a little bit, but in a short way, we don't know why our voters left the party or left the central left and went some other places. Mainly, they moved to the center. First of all, in general, I would say, after 73 years of existence, Israel, in general, moved from left to center, and now from center to the at least moderate right, or to the right. Just imagine this move from left to center and center to right. It has a lot with demography. It has to do a lot with the economy, or it has a lot to do with the world surrounding us. Many reasons for that. It will take a long time to explain. But if you look at the elections outcome, one after the other, the shift is very clear. I myself blame the 6-day war, not the war itself, but the outcome of the war. The very fact that Israel has been controlling the life of millions of Arabs since 1967. It changed the country, ladies and gentlemen. It changed the character of the Israelis. We have never controlled the life of millions of people in our long history, but probably in this chapter of Jewish history. It changed the character of even the IDF, and especially the young generation of Israelis, those who serve in the army, and 1/3 or 50%, and sometimes the entire military service is taking place in the West Bank, in Judea, Samaria, and at the time, Gaza. People that used to live in those kind of relations between soldiers and civilians under Israeli government. I'm carefully choose my words, as you see, because I'm not left, I'm central left, so I don't call it occupation, because there are reasons for that and so on, but there were many years to find an enduring and peaceful solution between us and the Palestinians, and that hasn't been done, and maybe it will never be done, maybe. But so I'm not dealing with the political implications of Israeli-Palestinian relations. I'm asking myself, what happened to the Israeli society as a result of this long governor or holding the territories for such a long period? What did it do to the young generation of Israelis? But it's not longer the young, because it's already been 3 generations of Israelis serving in the territories and spending their military service, which are the shaping years of their personality under those circumstances. So I think you don't have to look too far. This is a major factor that shaped Israel and shaped those people's life and made them vote or choose governments which are responding to this new reality. We were left literally behind. We are still once in a while calling for, and the reason I joined politics 12 years ago was to try and push towards 2-nation state for 2 people, to save the state of Israel, to save my state from becoming a Jewish Arab state. This is the reason. That's what brought me to politics. I left the Knesset 2 years ago. Nothing has been done. I may go back to the Knesset in months or two. I haven't told you that I'm now back on the labor list. I don't know if I have a chance even to push forward the two-nation state. We don't talk a lot about, we don't talk at all about the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Maybe as a result of the Biden administration, it will come back again. But I'm not speaking about this. I'm asking, what did this situation, what did it do to us Israelis? The way we treat each other, the way we talk to each other, the way we drive, the Israeli culture was affected. And by the way, also relationship between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs as well, in a way. And until it's being solved, I don't know if it can be changed. I'm not sure. This is something to be watched. But in general, it derived from that 67 war, which, yes, saved Israel, united Jerusalem. I fully endorse it. But it's time to figure out how to depart from the West Bank. According to Israeli defense consideration and security consideration, there's no doubt about that. But to save Israel from those deep implications, social implications, and later on, even the elections implications, it changed Israeli politics very much. We cannot do very much on that. And that's why the central left gets smaller and smaller every few years. We are unable to build, again, a strong political power that will respond to the way the Likud is leading the country, both politically, economically, socially, and so on and so forth.
So I'm listening to you, and I have to say it's quite frustrating to hear this. I'm not challenging what you're saying; just the reality, in some ways, is frustrating. And
I'm raising I'm raising my children and my grandchildren there, right? I mean, I'm working on the future of the state of Israel. I'm trying to do my best to change their life. That's it. It's frustrating more for me than for you, for you and for our audience today, because this is our life, guys. Sorry.
So no, that's I'm with you, and I understand it completely. I'm trying to figure this out. If what you are saying is true, then the psychological connection is that people have with their party is inherently tied to what you just said, that the state has become more violent and so on. In other words, essentially, you didn't say it, but it's implied from what you said, that the Likud's connection with its voters has to do with with the sanctification of violence, with liking violent ideas, or even the principle that Israel is a violent society, and with various other things such as rejecting the elites. We saw maybe one of the best examples of this is the great support that the former Minister of Culture, Miri Regev, had among Likud supporters, totally anti the culture establishment in any possible way. I don't think anyone has gone as far, and there have been other ministers from the Likud before her in that position. No one has gone as far to really exemplify this rift. In other words, if what you're saying is true, then we have essentially on one side a party that appeals to people who either like violence or violent attitudes in society, or just don't mind it. Maybe they're not into violence, but they don't mind it, or they don't see themselves as violent people, but maybe there are violent elements in the way that they behave or raise their children. And there's just no one to buy the merchandise on the other side that says we don't need to be violent, we need to de-escalate. Maybe there are just not enough people to buy that other side. And I guess this is tied for me with the question of why have parties on the center left tried to be like the second Likud in many of the last elections, that is to play to what Netanyahu has said, that left is bad. So they say, oh, we're no longer left, we are center, we are whatever we are, but we're not left and we don't like Arabs. I know what you said, now it's going to change perhaps, but until now that has been the case. And every time it doesn't work, because what we've seen, you can't peel away more than 1 or 2 Likud seats at most with this tactic. In other words, it seems like no matter what you do, you are stuck at the moment with this situation where the bond between voters and Netanyahu, and some people asked if it's just Netanyahu or the party. I think it's probably both, but the voters are there and they're not moving away from that. And on the other side, you have a product that you don't have enough buyers for, so you don't get that many votes. And is that something that just for now not going to change?
Well, I don't see how it will change. I don't see yet. Maybe we'll get close to the elections, but as far as I can see today, I don't expect a lot to be changed or to change. I'll give you another example, which our audience maybe is not familiar with. 3-4 months ago, finally, Israeli UAE and Bahrain relations were normalized through the great assistance of the United States. I thank you all for that. It was Trump, but no problems. Whatever he did in the Middle East worked for the benefit of Israel. It's fine with me, okay? But Netanyahu had a dilemma. Now listen, this is the most crucial dilemma that any leader from the right may face. What's more important? Eretz Israel Hashlema, the entire Eretz Israel, which means the entire West Bank and even maybe back in Gaza, or normalize relation with UAE and Bahrain and Qatar and many places that are far away from Israel. And he had to decide what he wants to do, if he could, to annex territories, maybe not all of them, but some of them, from the West Bank, which according to the Likud, the core of the Likud, this is ours. Biblically, it's true, but internationally, it couldn't be done these days. Or to normalize relations with UAE and Bahrain, and later on Morocco and Sudan. And here is another Netanyahu. And here is another Likud leader. Exactly what Begin did in 1977, 8, 9, when he gave the Sinai back. He withdrew from Sinai, and he withdrew from Gaza Strip, from Gaza, for the sake of peace with Egypt. And here is Netanyahu, but it's not about Sinai. Sinai is far away. It's our homeland. And I fully agree. It is our homeland. It's the roots of the Jewish people. But he realized, and he preferred. So why did I say that? Not to I can compliment him for that personally. But the party followed him. The Likud followed him. And the 30 mandates, which represent, let's say, 1.5 million Israelis, are still supporting him. If ideology was at the heart of it, according to the ideology, there's no doubt that not only this bank of the Jordan belongs to us, but even the other bank of the Jordan, where Transjordan is, where Jordan is. This is all Eretz Israel. Read the Bible. We read the Bible every Shabbat. We know it is. No. So he made his own decision, which I fully support. I think it's more important to break the deadlock with Arab world and to find new ways to normalize relation and to strike peace, and it's fine with me. But at the same time, on the other ear, I said to myself, what's going on here? Where is it was a chance. There was a chance to annex territories. In the Trump term, in the presidency, Israel could have done many things. And one of them was to annex the West Bank, or even some of it. So that shows not only where Bibi is, it shows also that those people are first and utmost loyal to their own party and their own leader, not to the ideology of the Likud. but they would like to stay in power. And it also shows about Bibi's leadership. There's no doubt about it. We are not playing this game because actually, as we say always in Hebrew, in Israel, when the left goes to a war, Likud will join. When you make peace, the left will join the Likud. I mean, when the right makes peace, like Begin did, and now Netanyahu, the left, center-left support is safe. I mean, they stand next to you. On the other hand, if the center-left governments had to go to a war, the right will join them. It's very tricky, but that's the way it works in Israel. Labor and center-left has very little to offer at this stage because they haven't been in power for so many years. They have not been able to offer certain future to young leaders that are coming up in Israel, mayors, head of regional councils that were looking for a political party to carry them up. As if you are not in power and you have no budget at your disposal, you can do very little. You cannot attract, and you do not attract. It's actually this situation doubles itself all the time, and it's a closed circle. If you're not in power, you not attract the young generation. You not attract the young generation, you are not in power. That's how it works. So after so many years, Likud has much more experienced leaders, quite a number of leaders that has been serving in key governmental positions. The center-left has none, okay? My party now, Labor, the chairwoman of the party, which is the only one in Israel currently, which is
a woman, yeah.
Yeah, Merav Michaeli. She has never served in any government. She doesn't have any experience in serving in key executive positions. So she doesn't have a chance to become Prime Minister of Israel. Even the generals, the military, from former military, 3 army generals that came together to serve as a leader of Blue and White, were kicked out. All of them are leaving politics now. They are political babies, okay? Political babies. They are army senior officers, but they are privates in their political experience. And
Maybe
they were
pirates too, and what they did to the voters, you could say pirates also.
Okay. So it's a different meaning, but you're right in a way. But yes. And on the other hand, Likud managed to build a certain continuity of raising young people. That's the way it is. That's how you establish your power for generations to come. And when young people looked around, or still been looking and asking themselves, where will I get a chance, an opportunity? Where will I get, a job? If I belong to the Likud, my prospects are much higher than if I belong to the center-left because they can offer me very little. And I'm very practical now. I've been watching young Israelis. Where do they go now? They mainly go to the other side. The joke in Israel is that if you hear a siren, an ambulance siren in the street, it's either a baby born that will vote Likud or Labor, old man or woman that are going to the
on the way out. Yes.
That you're not coming back from. That's the common joke in Israel. So I don't like it very much because I represented in the Knesset for quite a number of years the senior citizens. So I'm their representative in the Knesset. So I like very much the senior citizens. But in a way, it tells the story. Young Israelis tend to follow Likud now, and the old guard, which unfortunately disappear, belong to the center left. So that's the change of power in the Israeli society.
So we are approaching. Thank you. We are approaching the end of our time, and I do want to say, first of all, we've been receiving quite a few questions that are about security issues and how Israeli public opinion shifted, and that'll be the focus of either our next or I think our next conversation actually. So we will touch many of these issues in our next conversation, which is on March 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. But I do want to ask you one last question that again combines a few of the other questions that we received, and that is about whether there is a connection there between the issue of security, meaning, let me rephrase this, whether security concerns have created this sense of a psychological dependence of many voters on the Likud. In other words, that, and we hear at least in the campaign messages of Netanyahu over the years, essentially saying, you can't trust the other guys. It's a security issue. Only the Likud is going to keep you safe. And for years, they've been talking about, shalom ve'bitachon, right? Peace and security. And now they can even say that they did it with the last few peace agreements, not with immediate enemies, but still they call it peace and for a good reason. And so is there that element, meaning that for a lot of voters, even if they are not into the personality cult around Netanyahu, the issue is different, that they feel the Likud, with Netanyahu's leadership, with his opposition to the Iran deal, with him saying, I'm very sorry to tell you guys, but we're forever going to live by the sword, as he said many times, is that something that psychologically creates this mechanism among many voters to say, I used to be labor. Like, where are all these people who used to be labor in the 90s and early 2000s? They still exist, many of them. So they say, I used to be like that, but I really can't trust these guys on the other side. And we tried to make peace. It didn't work. So now I can't get myself to vote not for the Likud. Is there that part of the emotional connection that's making it hard for labor to create the same emotional connections? How can you make an emotional connection with voters who feel that you are weak on the security issue?
When it comes to defense or security matters, the differences are not too big between, I would say, central left and central right, especially the moderate right and the moderate left. They are not. So most of the Israelis, for example, support anything Israel has been doing and will be doing to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear bomb. Even if it comes to military operation, they will. When it comes to Israel's borders, every Israeli will support any operation the government or the military will do to deter our enemies or to stop any infiltration into our sovereign territories. There are not many differences. Bibi wisely portrayed himself as irreplaceable. He's the only one that can negotiate with world leaders. He can fly from Israel to Washington and from there on the same day to go to Moscow and then come home. He's a world leader. He speaks, as you all know, beautifully. He represents Israel at the UN and elsewhere very distinguishedly. He builds relations with Europe, even with Europe, with East Europe especially. So he's helped very much to stabilize Israel in the world community and to gain credit, and will get credit for that. And when it comes to security, he is, and I should again give him the credit for that, he hasn't initiated any war in his long time in power. Please listen carefully to that. He hasn't initiated any war. Yes, one or two military operations but in Gaza, but they are limited. And he was even careful not to get back into Gaza. Well, he tried once and he failed, and since then, no more. So he's very careful, not only because he lost his brother, as you know, but also that he understands that Israel will gain nothing from any war in the Middle East, except in the case of Iran. But that's not the kind of a war that I mean. He's very careful. And a lot of Israelis, even from the center left, appreciate it. It's against, again, in a little bit of the, I would say, the hard power that Likud is supposed to use, okay? Yeah, some people in the right also sometimes criticized him why he was not ready to impose or to execute Israeli military. So other people blame him that he's fearful, that he's afraid. Okay, I accept a leader that is afraid of wars, okay, for many reasons. I personally don't want to see more wars in the Middle East, unless imposed upon us. That's something else. He has the credit of running Israel on issues of foreign relations, i.e. legitimacy for the state of Israel, as well as defense and security. And that helps him a lot, even within the central and central moderate left, I would say, that say to themselves, okay, if it comes to that point, we prefer him on others that were not able to carry their promises and commitments to us as the blue and white that Yaron probably will discuss with me next time. Yet, so ask me if it's so good, I mean, if Netanyahu is so successful, why should he go home? We haven't touched his personal behavior, Ron. We haven't touched the way he ran the country internally. And we haven't touched the danger I see to Israel democracy. It's a different conversation. I don't want to start it now. But with all the credit I give him on some of his achievements in foreign relations, foreign affairs, and security, I'm very much concerned about Israel democracy and the lack of education for some or too many of Israelis for the power of the Supreme Court or the judicial system on Israel, and even the power of the Knesset. In this segment of the population, people, I say it very carefully, very, very carefully, but I'm less convinced that they will be ready to fight and to demonstrate and to go out in the streets in order to safeguard Israelis' fundamental democracy, the foundations of the Israeli the foundations of the Israeli democracy, which I feel is now crucial to the future of Israel. I'm much less concerned, my friends here, for Israel's security, because Israel is the strongest military, has the strongest military in the Middle East, and I don't see anyone anywhere that can challenge Israel's superiority. But I'm very much concerned about internal processes within Israel, and one of them is what will happen with the judicial system of it, or with the in years to come, and the Knesset itself, which is the heart of Israel democracy. And I've been tracing a long process of the Knesset losing power and getting weaker and weaker and losing its power vis-a-vis the government. You don't hear a lot about it. You hardly can see it, but I'm telling you from the inside, that for me is a higher priority than the other issues.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very eye-opening and exciting. I just want to say that we talked today about why the left cannot create the same psychological bonds with voters that the Likud does. And next time, when we get to our meeting on March 2nd, I'll ask a slightly different question, which will be, why the left has not managed to create an alternative security doctrine that is compelling enough to compete with that of the Likud, because for most voters today, they see the left and they say, these guys are still living in the 1990s. They think that the Oslo agreements of the early 90s can still be implemented without change. They don't live in reality. We can't vote for these guys. So why hasn't the discourse changed? That's one of the questions that we'll deal with. And what really happened, we have received quite a few questions, and we're going to save those questions, by the way. So if you asked them today and we didn't get to you today, my apologies, but we'll do our best to get to them next time. Questions related to this issue of how Israeli public opinion, as you yourself mentioned tonight, shifted to the right, whether it was from the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, or maybe the collapse of the peace process, or the second intifada in the early 2000s. We'll see. We have much to explore. That is coming on March 2nd at 7 p.m. And that's it. I want to thank you very much. Thank all of you for joining us tonight. This has been, again, a pleasure and an honor to speak with you, Dr. Shai. Thank you very much. And we will see you all, hopefully in other events, but also on March 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Toda.